This program is brought to you by Teachers College, Columbia University. Please visit us online at itunes.tc.columbia.edu.
Policy world into practice as this area of mathematics and early childhood. We have a new National Academy of Sciences report. Quite unusually, 2 faculty members from Teachers College are on that national panel, the only instance in which an institution is doubly represented by their distinguished faculty. Herb Ginsberg and Sharon Lynn Kagan hold endowed chairs here and are leading internationally known researchers and leaders. And their work has been important not only in the United States, but really all over the world in shaping how we think about the development of children. Tanisha Woods is a senior senior research fellow at the Mailman School of Public Health. She worked in drafting this report very closely with the panel, has been on the inside of it, and is knowledgeable of all of the research and policy traditions that go into this. She worked previously, she's had a number of roles, and I'm not going to do the full CV, but she worked with Christopher Dodd on the House Education and Labor Committee, the subcommittee on children and families. So this is a person that's situated in the scientific community, working on projects such as this report today, but who also has a sense of where that has an impact on policy and how we shape national priorities. And of course, this is what we hope this report will do. Let me just give you a sense of the format we're going to follow, and then we'll delve right in. Each of the panelists is going to come up and make a brief presentation to you, beginning with Tanisha Woods. She's going to really take us into the report and what it says and tell us a bit about that process. Herb Ginsberg is going to take it from there and show us some things about kids and their learning from his research. And then Sharon Lynn Kagan is going to offer her view and also help us to tie this together. And then after their individual presentations, I'm going to ask them to come up. We'll shut off the screen, and they can really be in dialogue with you as a panel so we can really talk together. So without further ado, we'll begin with Tanisha Woods. Thank you.
Thank you. So we are really pleased to be here and have this opportunity to talk with you all about the report today. I just want to hold a copy of the report up, Mathematics Learning in Early Childhood Paths Towards Excellence and Equity. And so this is what the topic of discussion will be today. And as Dr. James mentioned, I was the study director for this report. And before we actually go into the presentation, I'd like to provide a brief overview of what we'll be talking about. I'm going to be talking about the study context and the charge, as well as the areas of expertise that the committee possessed and the individuals who made up the committee. And then I'll present the overarching recommendation. And from that point, Dr. Ginsberg and Dr. Kagan will talk about they'll kind of unpack the overarching recommendation and talk about the research base and the specific recommendations and action steps needed in order to realize it. So they'll be talking about the foundational and achievable mathematics for young children and what that actually looks like. Then moving into a discussion about instruction and curricula, and moving on to professional development of the early childhood workforce. And then we'll talk about who actually is in the early childhood workforce and in-depth discussion about that. And then moving into wrapping up the presentation with future directions for policy. So the context of the study, what was the environment, kind of what took place in terms of this study being developed and the report being written? Well, first there was, as you all are probably familiar with, a broad push for improvements in mathematics education, beginning in the preschool years. And so this really signals a recognition for the importance of the preschool period and mathematics actually being taught during that time. The second major factor that influenced this report was the increased focus on the importance of the preschool period as a time for intellectual growth. So there has been a recognition by researchers and practitioners for quite some time about the importance of the early childhood years as the foundation for learning. And in recent years, policymakers have also been putting forth initiatives that also they reflect that thinking. And for example, around the time that this report was released last July, the Obama administration put forth the Early Learning Challenge Grants Initiative, and this basically incentivizes states to improve their early childhood learning standards and also quality improvements. And so that's another factor that went into this report. And then finally, relative to other subjects, mathematics has really received less emphasis during the early childhood period. So historically, social emotional development has been a major area of focus for early childhood programming. And also literacy has received a lot of attention in the past several years. And this is reflected especially, for example, with the Reading First grants that came out of the Bush administration. And so we saw then that there were dollars being infused into research and programming around improvements in literacy. But less attention has really been given to mathematics during the early childhood years. And so now thinking about the context for the study and the funders, who were the funders? The Office of Head Start was the primary funder for this report, and we also received generous support from the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation, the National Institutes of Child Health and Human Development, and the Ewing Marion Kauffman Foundation. And so as I mentioned, the Office of Head Start really was the primary funder, and they saw this report as an opportunity for them to improve upon the mathematics education for young children in their programming. And this thinking, it's actually reflected in the committee's charge. So the committee, the charge that they had to attend to was, one, they needed to develop appropriate learning objectives for preschoolers, and also to provide critical evidence-based insights related to curriculum, instruction, and teacher education for achieving these learning objectives. So you can see from the charge that the Office of Head Start really was concerned about how they could support young children's mathematics education. And so in order to do this, we needed to have a committee that had a broad range of expertise, and you can see by looking at the slide, we had mathematics education and mathematics. We did have a mathematician on the committee, child development, early childhood education, and policy, individuals who had expertise in family processes and cultural context. So we really did have a multidisciplinary committee that was well positioned to actually meet the charge. And so now to talk a bit about committee membership. We had individuals from theorists to practitioners. The committee was chaired by Christopher Cross, and then you can see all of the other leaders in the field that were on the committee. And so just to give you a little bit of background on the committee process, we basically met 4 times over the course of 1 year. The first 2 meetings were public data gathering sessions, and then the last 2 meetings were an opportunity for the committee to deliberate and to finalize the recommendations. And this is a consensus report, so the committee did have to agree upon the recommendations. In addition to committee membership, we also had a peer review process. So this report was reviewed by 11 experts who have similar expertise, and we had to respond to their critiques, and ultimately that strengthened the report. And so the committee looked at 30 plus years of research in developing this report, and the conclusion that came from that was that when given the appropriate learning opportunities, young children can become competent in mathematics. So virtually all young children can become competent. And the recommendation that grows from that conclusion is a coordinated national early childhood mathematics initiative should be put in place to improve mathematics teaching and learning for all children ages 3 to 6. And so what this report does is it basically provides guidance and the action steps, the recommendations for implementing this recommendation. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Dr. Ginsberg.
So first of all, the background. Over the past really 30 or 40 years, certainly since the time in the 50s when Piaget did his work on early mathematics, there's been a lot of research on kids' mathematical thinking. and it covers children's everyday math, literally from infancy through the time that they get to school. And the new research gives us a very different view about what kids are like and what they are capable of. In the past, there have been conceptions of young kids as being very, quote, concrete, unable to deal with abstractions, and some people concluded then that it's really developmentally inappropriate to involve young children in mathematics. The idea is that they will learn from play, but we shouldn't teach them. But now we have very different views, and we've learned that young kids are very complex in their everyday mathematics. They are, yes, sometimes concrete, but often are dealing with really interesting abstractions, genuine mathematical topics like what is the bigger number, or why is this more than that. They have some misconceptions, certainly, but they also have some very useful concepts that they have developed over the years. They have some methods for calculating, for solving mathematical problems, and they have some methods that don't work so well. I think you have to see this to understand it. And so I'm going to show you really 3 examples of different kinds of things.
They went on for a while.
This is a 4-year-old.
3 days. Now, you know what? When they go for a walk, well, Goldilocks got lost. They're trying to find Goldilocks, okay? So they're out looking for Goldilocks. And you know what happened? They meet 2 more bears. There were 3 bears here, right? And they meet 2 more bears.
So we have a problem.
And what about the other place? 5, you sure? Let's see, here are the 2 bears. Let's make sure. Is it really 5? You sure? Very good.
Okay, so in that clip, which is probably about a minute or less, you see so many things about little kids' interests in these issues. In Goldilocks and many other stories for children, there are mathematical problems, right? We have the biggest bear gets the biggest bowl of porridge, and a medium-sized bear, the mediums, that's a kind of functional relation between the two. They are very interested in counting. They are concrete sometimes. She was using these objects, but not all the time. She pointed with her finger. So that's kind of concrete, but what was she pointing to? She has some mental representation of what these objects are and how to figure out how many there are altogether. This is not a child who'd be uninterested in mathematical learning. Then I show you a naturalistic observation of some kids in a low-income daycare center in New York City, which actually happens to be immediately behind the Metropolitan Opera House. It's an interesting feature of New York. You get all these mixtures. And these kids are in kindergarten, and they're low-income kids, and the chances are, statistically, that they're not going to do very well in school. If there's any fact in American education, it's that low-income kids don't do as well as middle-income kids. So the question is, what kind of potential do they have so that we could help them? There'll be 2 episodes. They chose to do this during free play. counting by twos. Okay, so these are kindergarten kids. I don't know the exact age. So here's the situation where you have low-income kids in a daycare center in New York City who decide to do this kind of play. And in the first case, they were doing their clapping activities. Now, we know that's passed on culturally. Maybe some of you have learned this. I often ask the audience to do it now. You probably will not be able to. It's very complex. So it's a pattern. It's a very complex pattern. I once had a music theorist look at it, and she told me how this pattern is used by Bartók as well. I don't know. But it's a complex pattern, and what's very interesting about it also is that she mathematized it. She counted the big units of the beats, right? She didn't have to do that. And that's not an easy activity. And then it's interesting that a little later on, they went to the calendar. And calendar is often a boring, deadly activity. It's based on weird ideas like rows of sevens, which don't make any sense at all. But they decided to do the counting, and they decided to count by two. At first, they could simply be skipping a number without knowing the sequence of twos. But you saw at the end, there weren't any numbers, and they kept going on, counting by twos. So this shows something about kids' interest in numbers. They're not interested only in concrete things. They're also interested in how numbers behave. That's a very fascinating topic for them. So these are examples, and I have several hundred hours of videotape, actually more, for anybody who wants to watch them. I really do. We also know from the research that lower income children lag behind certain aspects of everyday mathematics, particularly verbalization. They don't verbalize as much, apparently. They really do seem to have the same concepts and procedures. It's not that they don't know anything. They are behind. There's some controversy about how much behind. But it seems clear that all kids can develop an everyday math. They need to develop it further, and they can mathematize it. They can put their everyday notions into more explicit mathematical form. So we conclude from the research that young children are ready, willing, and able to learn math. They don't need to be made ready to learn math. They're already doing it. They don't yet think, when they're in preschool or kindergarten, that learning math ought to be a problem. We tend to teach them that in school. That's what our math education is most effective at. It's teaching kids not to like it within 3 or 4 grades. We had one girl who walked into a daycare center, actually right across the street here in Corpus Christi, where we were working. And the first words when she came in were, "Teach me something." And the teacher, being very child-centered, said, "What would you like me to teach you?" And she said, "You're the teacher." So, the situation right now is that many early childhood classrooms are socially positive. This is some work that Bob Pianta has done and other people. So teachers try to be warm to the kids. There's some social-emotional training. But they're very passive instructionally. Teachers do not take the lead in introducing activities for kids, activities from which kids can learn. It's also true that most early childhood programs spend very little time on focused mathematics. If you walk into these classrooms and you ask them, "Are you doing math?" they say, "Oh yes, we do math all the time." Because when we have snack time, we say, "Oh, there's 1 cup for each plate," or something. They really don't get much beyond this. They don't get much beyond counting up to 10, learning about the names of the shapes, circle, square, triangle, which honestly most kids know already. They don't need to learn this. They may think they're doing math, but observations of these classrooms show that they're really not. They are much more interested in literacy, perhaps spurred on by shows like Super Y. We have the head of Super Y right here, and others. They are really interested in literacy activities. The teachers feel more comfortable, I should say, with literacy activities, but they have a real hard time with math. Most of the time, when researchers observe in classrooms, you see that time spent on mathematics teaching is really of low quality. It just isn't very good. And also the teachers, as we'll see later, themselves are a little frightened of the math. I just read an article yesterday about a new piece of research showing that women teachers in elementary school in the first few grades pass on their fear of mathematics to the kids very early on. And so to remedy this situation, we need to think about content. Well, what should we teach? How should we teach? Should there be some kind of curriculum? So we want to avoid what's been called in the math research community this mile wide and inch deep, doesn't say deep, mile wide and inch deep phenomenon where we cover things very superficially. So the committee report says that we ought to really focus on number and geometry. And there are many, many topics we can do, but we should focus on key aspects of those. And one thing, if you look at the report, we have a chapter, mostly by the mathematician on the committee, explaining the mathematics, which is not simple. They're very interesting questions about basic ideas in number and in shape. And also, we stress that the so-called process goals, that is learning to think mathematically, not just learning the facts, not just learning the content, but learning how to think in this way is very important. And mathematics, it turns out, has a very large literacy component, because if you attempt to explain how you are solving a problem, you have to use your words. Right? They tell you use your words. And they need to learn how to mathematize. They need to learn to make these things formal. Formal, of course, with meaning. And so, what should early mathematics education involve? Well, we know that kids need rich environments, and that's been a theme in early education for a very long time. And certainly that's great, but it's not enough. Children need to play. There's a lot of controversy about this, and some people have set up the false choice between, well, either they're going to play or they're going to be educated in a horrible way. That's not the alternative. That's not the question. Yes, they absolutely need to learn to play, but that does not preclude interesting and even playful instruction. So play is not enough. Yes, projects are very important. These large projects of the sort that the Reggio Emilia people, for example, espouse. And those are very good. The problem there is that the coverage of those, the mathematical topics that they cover, is often a little haphazard and doesn't necessarily accumulate in useful ways. So they also need intentional teaching and curriculum. Teachers need to take the lead, say we're going to study this today, do it with them, even in a group. I recently talked with a friend who's a dance teacher, and she teaches very young kids. And I asked her how she teaches them dance. She says, well, I have a dance curriculum. The first meeting, we do certain steps, we do certain things, and her whole dance curriculum is planned out over a period of several months. So dance is a really developmentally appropriate thing, right? So if you can have a curriculum in dance, why not also have it in mathematics? There's nothing necessarily bad about a curriculum. So teaching doesn't need to be as pressured as it often is in elementary school. It should be intentional. And that means giving that good learning environment, giving challenges. Math is not always fun. Neither is tying your shoes, neither is dance. It may involve hard work, which is good for you. Teachers need to use math talk, always talk about the concepts and what the kids are doing. This is a basic form of literacy. They need to present math as thinking, language, and activity. They need to do formative assessment to find out what kids are up to, and then mentally, and link instruction to that. And they need to use integrated math activities, that is, math activities that are part of other things going on in school, as well as pure math activities in themselves. There's nothing wrong with that, and kids actually like that quite a lot. And curricula. Curriculum is a careful sequence of activities. And in the report, we review the mathematics teaching learning paths. These are sort of developmental trajectories. These are ideas about the order in which kids learn things, can learn things when they're taught most effectively. And so the curriculum needs to be determined partly by the discipline itself. What's the math that needs to be learned? And then these teaching learning paths. And so a curriculum will involve a year-long sequence for the kids, school year-long sequence, not counting holidays and not counting September when they're all crying. We have to have a loose definition of a whole year. And it's a plan over the year. You're going to cover certain material. And there are several programs of this type that already exist. One of them is Big Math for Little Kids that I was involved in. Another is Building Blocks that Doug Clements was involved in. And now it turns out there are a whole bunch of new curricula that are coming out. High Scope, for example, is revising its curriculum. It just came out, I think, a few months ago, and now it's much more of a curriculum, I would say, than it ever was before. So those are some of the things then that kids can do and that they need to learn. Now that puts a burden on teachers, because now teachers need to know a lot and need to have a lot of skills. They need to know the math that they're teaching. It would seem obvious, this is very simple math, they should know it, but it's not so simple, and also they don't know some of it. I once saw a curriculum supervisor in one of the New York City schools tell the kids that they could not designate first, second, third from right to left. It had to be from left to right. Okay. Teachers need to know something about kids' learning and development. You don't want to teach something without understanding the learner. They need to have knowledge of pedagogy. What are the tricks of the trade, the techniques? How do you use manipulatives? How do you set up a whole group of kids, 20 kids, let's say, in circle time, and do math effectively with them? They need to have ways of assessing kids' knowledge. Teachers need to be able to find out what the kids know and what the kids have learned from any particular activity. And then they need to have knowledge of the resources and tools available. They need to know about different curricula. They need to know about computer software. They need to know about lots of other resources that are available. So there's a broad consensus then that professional development of the early childhood education workforce is a very, very high priority. I think the biggest challenge to doing math education with kids is not the kids, it's not the curriculum, it's not the activities, it's the teachers. The teachers are not ready to do it, and very often they don't want to do it, and they're afraid of it. So we know that teachers play a central role in kids' learning and development. There's evidence that early education can make a big difference. And we know that teachers have difficulty in teaching it, and even in believing that it should be taught. Despite recent advances from NAEYC, National Association for the Education of Young Children, despite statements from NAEYC that we ought to teach early math, many early childhood teachers are against it. Now, it's also true that colleges and universities have not been doing a good job in preparing students to teach math. In many places, their early childhood departments will have many courses on reading and many, many other things, but almost nothing on the one subject that the students are least prepared to teach and about which they know the least. Now, is that rational educational planning? And many early childhood educators completed their training at times when math education was really devalued, de-emphasized. And so they're surprised now on how important it is, how important we think it is to teach early math. So we need new courses, we need new early childhood education programs. We also need in-service support. And there are several components of this. In-service support should not be a once-a-month party on some randomly selected issue, as often happens in many locations. It ought to be tied to the use of a curriculum. Teachers have to learn to use curriculum. And the training needs to be extensive, ongoing, initial training at the beginning of the school year, follow-up sessions, learning communities. These themes are not limited to early childhood education. They're true in education generally. Teachers need to be supported through coaching, perhaps therapists as well, at least once a month. And they need to have opportunities for hands-on practice, discussion, collaboration, working together. So this is a lot for us to ask for, and now Lynn's going to continue with a discussion of the people of whom we are asking this, and then the general policy recommendation.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to Teachers College. We're so happy that you are all here with us today. I'd like to acknowledge the presence of our president, Susan Furman, and you've all met our provost, Tom James. Let me begin by telling you a secret. It's always an honor to be asked to be part of one of these Academy panels, and it is a lot of work that's involved. And usually you know that these panels are quite contentious, that people are very staked in their positions, and there is a lot of acrimony that develops in these panels. This one was not like that. And the reason that it wasn't was probably because of the two people whom you've just heard from. I really want to acknowledge the incredible tenacity of Tanisha and the work that she did in making this report readable and cogent from all the scraps of paper that we've given you, and also to really acknowledge the intellectual leadership of Herb Ginsberg on this panel and in so many other ways in our country. So thank you to both of you. My job is really to talk about the reality. Not that what you've heard is not real, and I don't have any fancy clips of children to share with you, but I do have some pretty daunting, and I hope you will agree, important facts to share. It is important that we understand who the early childhood workforce is. Let me ask you, how many of you are teachers working every day with young children? Can I see a show of hands? Good. How many of you are working in schools, maybe not every day with young children, but at least are in the school environment? So what's everybody else doing? How many of you are graduate students at Teachers College? Great. All right. Well, for all of you again, it is important to understand that in the United States of America, we have a very peculiar problem. About 50% of our families in this country with children under 5 rely regularly on non-parental care for their very, very young children. And indeed, the people on whom they rely constitute a not insignificant component of the labor force of our country. About 2.3 million people actually work in early childhood programs. You can see the percentages. Some are employed in centers, some are employed in family child care homes, but look at that 48% number. Those are individuals who work in early childhood who actually are in informal family, friend, and neighbor care. This is often care that is fundamental to young children's development, but is not regulated and is under the radar screen of state and local policies. Taking a look at those early care and education workers on whom we have data, we actually see some equally startling facts, and that is that a large percentage of them have very, very limited training, and that training varies by the kinds of programs that they teach in. For those who are lucky enough to teach in pre-kindergarten programs, a large percentage, 73, though nowhere near the 100% that's required for K-12 education, hold a BA. Take a look at the center-based programs, the kinds that the majority of parents in our country use. 30% of them only have a BA, and for home-based programs, only 11%. This gives you a picture of the challenge that we're dealing with in trying to inculcate a mathematics value orientation within the population. As if the training alone weren't problematic, the salaries for early childhood educators are not competitive, and these also are hierarchically striated depending on where the teachers work. It is important to note that not only are the teachers' salaries low, but what is often more important to them, their benefits, their health insurance benefits, and pension benefits are often not even provided at all. Indeed, this causes a phenomenon in this field, unlike many, except for perhaps McDonald's, where people come and go a whole lot. Indeed, in just 4 years, between 96 and 2000, not a particularly unstable period in our social history, 76% of the teachers who are employed by centers leave. So think about this. If you plan an in-service training program and you invest money and time in it, large percentages of those people in whom you have invested indeed leave. Indeed, the unpredictable turnover, many times happening at mid-year, is linked to poor developmental outcomes for children. So this is not without consequences. Echoing what Herb said, but trying to underscore this, as if all this weren't problematic enough, the reality is that many in the early childhood workforce are not even sure what we mean by teaching mathematics. And I in no way mean to denigrate any of the people in this room or any of our many fine colleagues who do. But on average, the teaching of mathematics, indeed the teaching of literacy, has not been part of their formal training. Early childhood educators importantly and correctly believe that social and emotional development and physical development are the two pillars of the field. And indeed, they are important pillars of the field. But that doesn't mean that they exist to the exclusion of other important areas of development, including all of the cognitive areas and mathematics and literacy. The misconceptions are deep-seated. If they weren't, they would be easy to eradicate. They exist and they persist for a variety of reasons. First of all, many of the people who are actually teaching children have not done well in mathematics themselves, so they have a math fear or a math phobia. Others really recognize that the press on standards and accountability has fostered a literacy ethos in classrooms where teaching letters and numbers and reading and pre-reading skills takes far precedence over virtually any other, quote, teaching that goes on. And indeed, some even believe, though I do think this sentiment is dissipating dramatically, that when you teach mathematics, you indeed are violating canons of what has been constituted as developmentally appropriate practice. I do think that's dissipating somewhat. So we present that sort of policy background, the reality of the field, as saying, so what are we going to do about this? What are the implications that our society and indeed our government should do? Well, first of all, we believe that there should be a declaration, not of independence, but of the importance of early childhood mathematics to children's learning and their overall development. And indeed, in making such a declaration, we are asking the people, everybody, the public, parents, teachers, pay far more attention to the potency of mathematics in terms of children's both short and long-term development. Second, we are asking states to assiduously look at their early learning and development standards so that indeed mathematics is reflected well. Along with a number of graduate students who are here, and I want to acknowledge all the people from the National Center for Children and Families who support me in this work and so much else. We really are understanding, because we have looked at state standards from all over this country as well as all over the world, that mathematics standards play a very low priority in the standards that currently exist for very, very young children. And indeed, the panel went so far as not only to say that you should look at your math standards, but there are areas that are important that you must make sure that are included. Finally, not finally, but next, we hope that curriculum developers, or those people who actually are framing much of the curriculum, will also pay attention to the findings of this report. And indeed, that when curriculum are revised, they will reflect revised standards, and they will reflect a new focus on mathematics. Now, to get to schools of higher education like our own, we really do believe that all schools of higher education, and I think at Teachers College we're doing a very good job of this, so it's a call to us, but to others as well, that indeed we need to examine our curriculum and our teaching pedagogies to make sure that they are reflective not only of the content of mathematics, but of the processes that mathematics evokes. Finally, we also see that in-service support is an essential component of an ongoing repertoire of activities the teachers must have if indeed they are going to effectively teach mathematics for young children. They need to understand the learning paths that have been magnificently articulated in the report, and they need to learn to implement a curriculum that is associated with those learning paths. But schools and teachers are not our only target audience. There is a tremendously important role for parents, for families, and communities. Remember that figure that I showed you, that the majority of young children in this country are not in formal settings. They are in homes, family child care homes, and other kinds of homes. This means that parents and family child care providers and others who work in all sorts of community-based programs must get on the program, get with the program, and understand the importance of mathematics learning. This means we have got a very, very big job to do, a big public relations job, a big job of engaging the media, and a very, very big job of engaging our policymakers in enhancing their understandings of the importance of mathematics education to little children's development, but as importantly, to the developmental trajectory of the entire educational enterprise in our country. I am deeply appreciative, and I want to underscore the role that the National Academy of Sciences plays in our country. It is our foremost scientific body, and in rendering these reports that have all been highly vetted and highly reviewed, we bring to you a great deal of knowledge that is actually not biased, but reviewed and highly objective. In addition, it should be noted that none of this would be possible without the support of foundations and private philanthropy. And it is very important to recognize that we are able to do this work because of donors who contribute and make these meetings, these sessions, and this work possible. So although the representatives who contributed to this study, I don't think any are in this room, we also nod our hats to philanthropists who donate and make our lives and work feasible. I think that's it. Thank you.
The preceding program was brought to you by Teachers College, Columbia University. please visit us online at itunes.tc.columbia.edu.